Hello, we'll just give everyone a second to filter in. See some people still joining. Okay, I think we can go ahead and get started. So hello and welcome to ALD Connect's webinar titled From Natural History to Clinical Trials, a Family Guide to Engaging in Research. My name is Felicity Emerson and I'm a project manager at ALD Connect. And I'm thrilled to be able to introduce today's panelists. So we're lucky to be joined today by Dr. Camille Kaur, who has worked alongside ALD Connect for many years and is now a resident physician at the University of Rochester Medical Center, focusing on child neurology. Camille developed a wonderful family guide for clinical research aimed at families with children affected by rare neurological diseases. The guide is available on our website on the resources tab, and the link will be posted in the chat shortly. Camille's development of this guide prompted a follow-up webinar, and we're excited to be here today to discuss clinical research basics and hear family perspectives. Joining Camille are our wonderful family panelists, Emily and Troy Reimer and Jennifer Steichen, who will discuss their experiences with clinical research from the perspective of parents of boys with ALD. As a reminder, before we get started, this call is for informational purposes only. This webinar is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. If you or a family member are ill or suspect that you or a family member are ill, please seek professional medical attention immediately. ALD Connect does not recommend or endorse any specific physicians, treatments, procedures, or products, even though they may be mentioned on this webinar. So with that, I'll hand it over to Camille.
Thank you so much, Felicity, for that warm welcome. Hi, everyone. It is such a pleasure to be here tonight. My name is Camille Kaur, and I'm here to chat a little bit more about clinical research and what your experience with that might look like as a family affected by ALD. So just as a kind of brief background, how I found my way to ALD Connect, I spent 2 years working as a clinical research coordinator at Mass General Hospital, working a lot with ALD Connect on a lot of different ALD-related research studies. I then moved to upstate New York to complete medical school at the University of Rochester, and then this past summer started my child neurology residency in Rochester. And so my inspiration for this project stemmed from a lot of the families that I worked with when I was a research coordinator, and my experience consenting families to research studies and realizing that for many families, that might have been their very first interaction with research and their first experience with it. And realizing that, in some ways I was tasked with introducing themselves to what research is and what their rights are and what the risks and the benefits are, as well as talking about the specific study. So I saw, a need for some sort of a guide that could be accessible to families to kind of address some of those questions and provide education in advance of the moment that you might be asked if you want to be in a study. Okay, so all of that kind of background led to the development of this guide. I was really grateful to, as I was putting the guide together, have the input of Christy Higuera and Jennifer Steichen, who will join us later this evening to kind of offer their family experiences as well. And the QR code in the bottom right corner will lead you to the guide. And I think Felicity mentioned she will put that in the link in the chat. So I just wanted to kind of walk us through a broad overview of the guide, recognizing that during this short webinar, we won't be able to address everything, but just to kind of give you a glimpse of what's out there and what information you might find if you decide to read the guide online. So the first kind of topic approached is talking about 3 very basic different buckets of research, which are basic science research, translational research, and clinical research. With basic research being research that's done on tissue samples or specimens by scientists in a lab to better understand a disease or a potential treatment. Clinical research, which is research that studies humans, how they are affected by disease and how they respond to different possible treatments. And then translational research, which is often called bench to bedside, which is the research that helps researchers go from one to the other. So it helps scientists take what they learn in basic science research and translate that into how it might be helpful to humans. So this next kind of schema I put together to sort of explain how we go, especially in a rare disease, from initially discovering a rare disease to eventually, many years down the road, developing a treatment that will hopefully get FDA approved for that disease. So just to bring us through these basic steps, everything is going to start when somebody identifies a new disease and they decide to describe it. They realize nobody has reported on this kind of constellation of symptoms before. A big theme that you'll see throughout this pathway is sharing the results of research with other people in the scientific field. And so after that person, discovers a new disease, they will publish about it so that other physicians and scientists can learn as well. The next step would be a basic scientist, so one who works with, again, tissue samples or specimens, might figure out which gene causes that disease, if it's a genetic disease. They'll then publish their results so that other researchers can read about it as well. The next step would be a clinical researcher who asks people who are affected by this disease to be in a research study. This is something that might be called a natural history study, which we'll talk about later on. They might learn more about that disease by asking patients to fill out a survey, taking blood samples, doing different measurements to better understand exactly what happens in that disease. They will then publish those results so that other researchers and scientists can learn as well. If they took any, blood samples, for instance, those samples might go back to a basic scientist who will do tests on those and publish their findings. Based on those published results, another basic scientist might discover, some new idea about a specific treatment that could be used to target that disease. They'll publish those findings. Next would come the translational researcher, who takes all that data about how the patient's cells in test tubes responded to that treatment and decide, okay, how do we translate that into a clinical trial? Should we give this treatment as a pill, as a shot? How many times a day does it have to be taken? Is it a one-time treatment or something that's taken throughout the rest of the patient's life? They'll take all that data and they will start to design a clinical trial that can be used to measure the effect of that treatment in patients. The next step would be a sponsor. So this is either a company or the federal government who decides that they want to fund a clinical trial to study this new medicine. Once someone has stepped up and decided to provide funding, then a clinical researcher will lead clinical trials to see if that medicine is safe and works in humans to treat the disease. And then the final step of all of this would be the FDA, the US Food and Drug Administration, who reviews the results of those clinical trials with a fine-tooth comb and decides whether or not the medicine is safe, works to treat the disease, and can be approved for the general public. So these next two slides will talk a little bit more about specific words that you might hear when you hear about different types of trials, what those mean. I won't go through all those right now, but they're available in the guide. And then again, distinguishing between three really common types of studies that I'm sure will come up tonight. The first one is natural history studies. So natural history studies, the real goal there is studying how a disease affects people. So trying to understand, even before using any sort of treatment or intervention, what does the disease look like? What happens to a person with the disease as they get older? Do the symptoms stay the same from birth? Do they get worse throughout a person's life? The next type of study would be a biorepository or a biobank. This is a study where participants would be asked to donate samples of their tissue. So that could be a blood sample, it could be a urine sample, any other type of human tissue. Those would be collected as part of a study and then shared with researchers in a lab so that they can understand more about the disease. And then the last major type of study that we'll talk about is clinical trials. So clinical trials are going to be studies where we actually try something new and see what happens. So the most common type would be using some sort of a treatment, whether that's a medicine, something like a gene therapy, and seeing how that affects the disease. This is where the natural history studies are super important. And that's because we have to know what would happen if we didn't treat the patients. So that's why those early steps of doing natural history studies are so important, so that once there is a clinical trial down the road, we can show whether or not the medicine had an effect that was different than what we might expect otherwise. This section will also talk about a lot of different other, buzzwords and key terms that you might have talking about different studies, things like double-blinded, open label, crossover terms. So all those will be detailed in this section. Next, there's an overview of different phases of clinical trials. The short version of this is essentially that early clinical trials are just focused on making sure the medicine is safe, whereas late phases of trials will be focused on understanding whether there are long-term effects of the studies. So we have to figure out whether it's safe, whether it works, and then whether there's any consequences or side effects that we need to be aware of. On the right side of this page, you'll see a questions to ask page, which are interspersed throughout the guide. And this is just there to give families kind of a helpful set of questions you might consider asking when someone asks you to be in a study, with plenty of room to write down responses or to jot down questions of your own as you go. So one of the major tenets of clinical research is that enrollment in a study has to be totally voluntary. So as a person considering being involved in a study, you have 10 basic rights. And these are true regardless of where you decide to be in a study, what kind of study it is, any of those other factors. So those are listed in detail here, but really important to go into research, understanding that this is a totally voluntary process. You have every right to say no. You have every right to say maybe later, but not yet. And so those, some of those rights are going to be outlined here. Now, with research being totally voluntary, it's important to know, okay, if I say no, what is my other option? And that will depend a lot on the type of study you decide to, you're considering. If it's something like a natural history study, you can just decide not to do it. You would just kind of continue on with your regular care, regardless of if someone had approached you to be in the study or not. So you can say, maybe we'll do this, maybe we won't. You can also always decide, say, this is a lot right now. We just got this new diagnosis. Our world is completely shaken, and it's not a great time right now for us to think about research. So you can say, maybe in the future, but not now. And then standard care would be your major option if you're considering being in a clinical trial that's offering some sort of an experimental therapy or treatment. And so if you decide not to be in one of those studies, standard care might look like, in cerebral ALD, that might look like a bone marrow transplant. In AMN, it might look like physical therapy and medicines to target different symptoms. So those are always going to be your options that you have regardless of research. You can always decide you want to do one of those things if you decide you don't want to do kind of an experimental clinical trial instead. So this section will talk a little bit more about what it looks like in the process of giving your permission to be in a study. So there are all sorts of regulations and rules that govern clinical research that all research teams have to follow. And a big part of that is a very specific way that they get your permission to be in a study. One of the most important aspects of this is that you're fully aware and informed of what your rights are, what the risks of the study might be, what the potential benefits could be. And this isn't just going from the researcher to the parent. Depending on the age of your child, children can be asked to give their assent, sort of a junior version of official permission or consent. Depending on their age, they can be asked to give as well. Eligibility, I won't talk about in a ton of detail here unless there are specific questions later on, but essentially eligibility is a question that comes up a lot with clinical trials. where a new clinical trial comes out and a lot of patients in the community are super excited about it, want to enroll in the study. It's something new, only to find out that they might not be eligible to be in that study. And I think a lot of times this can understandably cause huge frustration, saying, why would you prevent some people from enrolling in certain studies? And this section will walk through, the reasoning behind all of that and why it is. I think a basic way to understand it that's been helpful to me is to think about, when we have a new clinical trial studying some sort of new experimental therapy, we want to set ourselves up for success in having the best odds of showing that it helps what we think it will help. And in order to do that, sometimes we have to restrict the people who can enroll in the study to those who we expect will have the biggest benefit of it. But if you have more questions about that, I'm happy to chat more about that later. But it's also detailed in this section here. All right, so this next section, on this call, I am not the authority on, but I think, as a family thinking about being in a study, there are a ton of really important factors to consider. Some of those are detailed on this slide, and they'll be individual to every family. But depending on the type of study you're looking at, thinking about what is the time commitment? Like, how many hours are we going to be at the hospital for this visit? Or how many times are you going to ask us to come back to the hospital for future visits? Travel. Is this a study site that's close to your house? And if not, how far are you going to have to travel to get to these visits? Siblings. A lot of families with ALD have children who are and aren't affected by ALD. Are siblings going to be able to come with you to visits? If they have to stay home, is there someone who can watch them? Impact on medical care. For some clinical trials, there is sometimes a stipulation that if you enroll in the study, you're restricted from certain other types of therapies while you're enrolled in the study. A common example that we see across a lot of neurological diseases is if you enroll in a gene therapy study, you typically cannot enroll in another gene therapy study down the road if the first one is shown not to be effective. Coping with study visits. Especially for young children, study visits can be long, sometimes stressful. And so when you're thinking about adding something on to what might already be a long and stressful day at the doctor's, how do you think your child will cope with that? Thinking about how your child will cope with it, a wonderful resource that a lot of hospitals have are called child life specialists, which I expect many people in the audience are already familiar with. But this is a absolutely wonderful role in the hospital. Child life specialists are individuals who have specific training and expertise in child development and have a lot of great strategies to help children cope with medical procedures and interventions. And then lastly, I like to mention this sense of paying it forward. Especially in rare diseases, I think families so often feel like I need to participate in this to help the next family that comes along so they don't have to have the same experience that our family did. And I think some families feel that and it comes with a sense of pride and it motivates them to want to be involved in research. But for other families, that can feel like a huge burden and feeling like you have already gone through, your own family's experience and then being asked to do more, to be involved in a research study just to help the next generation can feel like a lot. I think both sides are equally valid and important, and just an important thing to consider. Next, we'll be thinking about the financial considerations of being in a research study. Both the direct costs, so things like, are any parts of the research study going to be billed to your insurance? Are you going to have copays? Is going to go towards your deductible? But also indirect costs. Is the study going to help with any extra travel that you might need to do or compensate you in any way for time that you spend filling out surveys or doing focus groups? And then this final section of the guide just gives kind of a very brief overview into some of the new and exciting technologies that are being used in clinical research in rare diseases. So I think, particularly the gene therapy section here will be very relevant to ALD families. if that's something you're interested in learning more about. This last section here just goes over a couple of additional resources that families might find helpful in exploring research and thinking about what it might look like for their family. So I want to thank ALD Connect so much for the opportunity to be here this evening, as well as 3 families who were instrumental in kind of getting us to here today. So Christy Higuera, who is not on the call tonight, was one of the family members who reviewed the guide with me and helped offer her family's insights, as well as Jennifer and Matt Steichen, who contributed to the guide and are here tonight, and then Emily and Troy Reimer, who are joining us on the call tonight. And I am super grateful to be able to kind of hear their experiences with clinical research. Lastly, I have to send a huge sense of gratitude to all of the different patient advocacy partners, including ALD Connect, that helped to disseminate this guide and get it in the hands of families. And then finally, a list of some of the mentors that helped me with this project and lended their expertise and their wisdom. So with that, thank you again so much for the opportunity to be here. And I will next hand it off to Emily and Troy Reimer, who will tell us a little bit more about their family's experience with their 20-year-old son, Matthew, and his involvement in clinical research. I will hand it over to you.
Hi, thank you so much. My name is Emily.
I'm Troy.
And we live in Lawrence, Kansas. And Matthew was diagnosed with ALD when he was 7.5 years old in 2011, spring of 2011. He had had a major adrenal crisis. We had rushed him to the ER after he had come home early from school with a terrible headache and listlessness, and we just thought he had the flu because we had 4 kids. He was the youngest of 4, so I just was sort of waiting this out a little bit, but it soon showed that he needed to be seen, so we took him in, and long story short, after a lot of testing and 5 days in the hospital, well, even after that, it took a while for them to diagnose ALD. So we were pretty devastated. I think I went straight on to Facebook or something looking for some support, found a support group there, and they told me to check out the ULF. So check out ULF and look into the Lorenzo's oil study. And then during this time, we visited with the geneticist at the hospital that took care of him. And they basically said, take him home and love on him and take a lot of pictures. And we were really devastated, as you can imagine. And we talked about Lorenzo's oil with them because that was something we had researched already. And they had said that was snake oil and to not bother. But we were undeterred and wanted to just check it out a little bit more. So how to decide, that's the question. Yeah.
So, I think that the Lorenzo's oil study, at least when we joined, it was late in the days of its existence. And in fact, Matthew was on the edge of eligibility from an age perspective already, because he was at the time nearly 8, and they usually started earlier with the boys that were in the study.
And I think it went to like 13 or something.
Something like that. But they were already, I think, a little bit, it wasn't a traditional study in that there was no control group, there was no placebo. We looked at it. We looked at it more as therapeutic than from a study perspective, even though it was like that. It was a study as well. It was through Kennedy Krieger and some
Dr.
of the
Raymond.
Dr. Gerald Raymond, who is world renowned, and so we felt a sense of care because of his knowledge and the fact that he was one of the foremost experts in the field, and so that felt reassuring to us. But we did have to travel initially to Baltimore and meet with the team there,
which is challenging because we had 4 kids and they were younger and didn't want to leave them. We didn't have any grandparents close by. We just wanted to be together as a family going through this. And so we had friends that kind of came out of the woodwork that helped with some fundraising for that, like bowling fundraisers and things like that, just to get some tickets and be able to pay for some extra things for that initial trip. Because I was not working at that time. I was stay-at-home mom at the time. So yeah, it was a lot to think about. We thought a lot about, well, how would this affect our family? Because this would mean changing his diet, which also changes all of our diets in some ways. And I would have to learn how to manage food with his friends and at school. And it was just a hard thing for people to understand because he looked well and he looked normal. But there was this awful thing happening in his body. So for me, I felt like I could handle all that. I just wanted him to have something because we felt so helpless, and this was something. And we were given articles and things to read by Dr. Mosier, and for me, I didn't question it very long, honestly. I just wanted something for his body I knew that there could be lower platelets. I knew there would be, he might struggle socially with the food thing perhaps, but I was just like determined that if they were going to have pizza at a party, I would make sure he had his pizza for a party. It looked like everybody else. So yeah, there were some challenges there. And our other children, well, I asked Matthew actually recently, do you remember that time, what that was like when we said we were gonna consider this, and what it could mean for him? And he said, I don't really remember it being very traumatic. I'm like, well, that's good. But he remembers having to change his diet. He knew that he wouldn't have to do it forever. He remembers that, and that he was kind of game. And we were really thankful for that.
Some of the things that they gave us at the initial very long meeting with the doctor and team. We met with various different people that had different roles on the study as well. One was a nutritionist that we worked with.
I think it was Hung.
And we had to, coming in, we didn't really know much about the way studies worked, but one of the requirements was that we had to have blood draws every month. And so those were, I think we had to draw two or three different tubes of blood every month from a 7-year-old. And that was something that we didn't necessarily really think about it too much to start with, but it was something to consider whether or not, and Matt was one of the kids, probably the best the best suited of any of our kids to be in this situation. But we had to find a phlebotomist that was willing to draw that for an outside agency, basically. That was part of it. And also someone that Matt connected with, right? It wasn't just about being very clinical. There had to be a human relationship there. And I don't think that our first stab, so to speak, worked. And we did find a person that was able to do that for us. So that was one of the things that we had to work through a little bit.
And then we were also given reports, like we were told we would get reports of his blood work and what that looked like and what it would mean, what his body was doing at that time. And so
for us, the financial part of it was primarily in travel, which was, episodic. It was yearly or whatever. It wasn't ongoing because the study materials for us anyway, in this particular study, the Lorenzo's oil was provided free of charge to us. There was no billing of our insurance because it wasn't really covered under insurance. It wasn't FDA approved. And so it was all an investigational study. And so that was, there was no monthly cost for us. It was just a matter of the yearly visits.
And I think our whole family went that first year. And then after that, I know I went alone with Matt another year. Maybe it was just Troy and me another year with him. So they didn't come every single time, not as a whole family. I also started, like, I was really wanting to meet some other families whose kids were in the study, and of course we weren't able to get that information. So I just reached out on Facebook, like the ALD support group, and said, if anybody has a son in Lorenzo's oil study, I'd like to know who you are. I want to start a support group. So yeah, I did that along with, I think, Kathleen O'Sullivan Fortin, and I did that together for a while. So I'm glad to have her with me at that time. So I mean, I wouldn't have changed anything about that time from what we knew. I mean, that's what we knew at the time. Looking back, I can't see how we would have done anything differently.
No, I mean, we did have to consider, there were, and they communicated it to us, the risks, to him from this. One of the risks was lowered platelets, and so that was part of the reason for the monthly blood draws. But also just to track that we were doing our part as well, because if he was not following the low-fat diet along with the Lorenzo's oil, they could see spikes in different levels of the very long-chain fatty acids. So we were expected to follow the protocol, and if we didn't, then we could be removed from the study. And we kept him on it for 6 years-ish, and then he has grown to be an young adult now, and he is now he was part of a new study, and it's a national registry that he was the person that had to sign the papers and read all of the ins and outs. But this one wasn't an ongoing medical study. It was basically just an anonymized study with his blood to be able to build a database for other researchers to study. And so I think that's the sort of pay it forward for him, was just to be part of that that database of boys and men that have this disease. So I think that's probably, is there anything else that you want to add?
I guess I got involved in the Myelin Project. I was on the board for a little while, and met Patty Chapman and her son Greg Benton, and we did a fundraiser for the Myelin Project too, for I think around 2013 we did that.
I think the biggest thing for us, and I think many who are on the call now, is just the sense of isolation that we have, because it is a rare disease, and we just don't have the ability, or it's harder to find connection with other families that are going through this. And so that's one of the things that we really struggled with.
I guess the blessing was that he was young at the time and so resilient. And I think the parents often need the support from other parents more than anything. There are times when Matt did maybe feel a little bit isolated with that disease, but oftentimes I think it's the parents that really need a lot of support too, trying to be strong for their kid and this devastation, and trying to be positive. That was hard. So yeah.
I think that's us. We can pass it on to the next person.
All right, we'll pass it off to, thank you so much, Emily and Troy. That was really wonderful to get to hear your family's story. Next, we'll go to Jennifer Steichen, who will share a little bit more about her experience with clinical research with her son, Ira, who is 10.
Can you guys hear me? Yeah, okay. Hi, my name is Jennifer Steichen. I have put together a little slideshow that I want to thank Felicity for scrolling through it for me. You can flip to the next slide if you'd like. So this is our family. We have 4 boys. The oldest is 14. and the youngest is 7. Ira is the only of our 4 boys who has adrenoleukodystrophy, and we did not find out about it until he was about 4.5 years old. ALD was not on the newborn screen in Minnesota when any of our kids were born. It was added shortly after our last son was born. And so the only reason we know about it is because Ira had a little cousin, Nico, born in June of 2018, who tested positive on his newborn screen. And so then we went on and had all of our boys tested. Ira was the only one who tested positive. And because he was already 4 at the time, they called us with his results and said, you need to come in tomorrow and have his first MRI. It's critical because he was at that really critical age. So that's us. And he just turned 10 last Monday, a week ago today. So he's doing great. He is asymptomatic. He does not have adrenal insufficiency, and his brain looks good. And he is monitored at the University of Minnesota, which is kind of in our backyard. So we are very fortunate. We live in Lakeville, Minnesota, which is a suburb of St. Paul. It's about a 20-minute drive into Minneapolis and to his hospital. So we're very close to one of the major ALD centers, which has made monitoring and participating in studies probably a lot more convenient for us than for a lot of families. And so we have participated in a number of studies. And if you want to flip to the next slide, I just kind of did a little write-up about each study that we have done. The first one is the ALD National Registry. So Dr. Gupta is Ira's doctor. That's who we see when we go to the U of M every 6 months. And he is trying to create a biorepository where so every time Ira goes for his monitoring, he gives a urine sample, and then he gives extra blood in addition to the blood that he gives to monitor for his adrenal insufficiency. For a while, we gave a stool sample as well, and then that became kind of a burden. And so we no longer do that, but he does give the urine and the blood every time he goes. And then that is, I took these words straight off of this study. The purpose of the study is to strengthen understanding of ALD and help identify biomarkers that can assist with the detection of ALD. And so they are collecting these samples and then using them to help, figure out which kids will go on to develop adrenal insufficiency, or which ones are there other, markers on their blood that tell who will develop cerebral disease and who will not. So this is a pretty easy one for us. It's not really a burden on Ira or on us. I don't think Ira probably even knows that he's giving extra blood for this. And so to him, it's just routine, not a big deal. We do it twice a year. There is no compensation for this study. We're happy to do it. So that's the first one. And then the second one, and I think I have some photos. So that's Dr. Gupta. And then Dr. Miller is his endocrinologist, and that's Ira looking at his MRI with Dr. Gupta. And then down in the lower right, he is giving a sample of his blood, and we have a really great guy who they sing and dance to Elvis while they give blood and just kind of make a party out of it. So the next study, okay, this was a one-time study that we did. It was actually Dr. Gupta called me on the phone and said the CDC is trying to really hone their newborn screen study, and they were looking for people. They were looking for more blood samples, and so the University of Minnesota signed on to be one of the hospitals that would collect. And so they wanted patients who were positive with ALD but asymptomatic. And so because Ira got ALD from me, I was also eligible for this one. And so it was really easy. We went in for Ira's regular appointments, and he gets all his appointments done in the same day. They have an ALD clinic on the last Friday of the month. And so we went in for our regular appointments, and when he went to the lab to give his blood sample, they just took a few extra tubes from Ira. And then they took, I believe, 5 tubes from me, and they were given a number. So they didn't have our name or any of that data. They were given the number, the place of birth, and the date of birth, and sent that off to the CDC. And the purpose, as I said, was to help make newborn screening methods for ALD more accurate, because they have known positive samples now that they can use to compare and just help increase the accuracy of that newborn screen, which we support, obviously. So that was a one-time thing. We each got a $50 Visa gift card. So Ira was thrilled to do it. I'm like, here's my arm, take my blood. And then they gave us a certificate to thank us for our participation as well, which was kind of a nice gesture. So I've got a photo of that on the next slide. So there's Ira giving his blood. Ira asked if I got a token. So they have a little machine with toys in it, and they give him a token every time he gives blood. And he asked if his mom could have a token because I gave blood. So we each got bouncy balls, which is what we're holding up in that second photo. And then you can see the certificate that the CDC gave us to thank us. We also got gift cards for participating in that study, which was nice. We would have done it without compensation, but we're happy to take it. So that was the second one. And then the third is a brain study. Dr. Pierpont is doing a study, and this one we go to the neuropsychology unit on campus at the University of Minnesota. And so this one is once a year. Ira goes in and he has neuropsych evaluations. And so we've been doing this one for a couple years now. So it's on the same day that we're already going there for his monitoring eval. And he goes in a little bit early and he just gets to play games on the iPad. It's a finger tapping study. And so I think they're checking his response time or his reaction time. But to him, it's like he's just playing a video game on an iPad. They're checking his fine motor skills and his cognitive skills so that, and this again, I believe you have to be asymptomatic to qualify. So he does it every year, and then they're able to compare each year to past results. And the other component is that while he's doing that, I fill out a survey, and a lot of it is about coping mechanisms for parents of children with ALD. So what helps you cope? What things do you not find helpful? It's just a lot of questions. We do it at the same time. They take Ira into another room, and then I fill out the survey. And then they also do get to look at his MRI and see what his brain is doing and compare that to the other data that they have. I think we each get like a $10 Target gift card each time we go, or a 20, I can't remember the amount, but Ira gets excited about that. So that is the brain study. And you can go ahead and flip to the next slide. So that's him at the neuropsych unit on the left. That's it. I don't have a whole lot of pictures for that one. So you can go ahead and share the next slide. This last one, I honestly did not remember participating in this, but I found it in my email from a few years ago that somebody at Stanford University was doing an ALD caregiver study. This one was really simple. It was just an online survey that I filled out on my phone and sent off. And that was it. And they did a raffle, and I think they gave out like two $50 Amazon gift cards, and I won one. So that was kind of exciting. But again, would have happily done it without that. So you can go ahead and flip to the next. So our story is a little bit different than the Reimers in that, did I say, is it Reimer? It's a little different in that we live very close to an ALD center. Like I said, it feels like it's in our backyard. And so it's very convenient for us to participate in a lot of these studies. And they're able to just tack them on to the beginning or end of an appointment that we're already there for. So we're not making any extra trips down to the hospital to do it. Also, I think because Ira is 10, it's a little bit easier for us because although he did do them when he was younger, he's able to understand and give his consent. And so I would say what motivates me to participate in these studies is just a strong desire to help move research forward and to feel like I'm doing everything I can to help the doctors that are looking for treatments for our kids. And also, when we got this diagnosis, it was a lot of anxiety, a lot of unknowns, a lot of feeling really helpless. And I feel like as parents of a child with a rare disease, you do feel like there's nothing you can do but worry. And so this gives me something that I can feel like I am doing something to help and kind of turning that anxiety into action and helping other families with this diagnosis and maybe even helping you know, doctors find better treatments for my own child down the road as well. Like I said, none of the studies that we have participated in have had a really high cost for us. They haven't involved a lot of travel. We did not have to change Ira's diet or do anything that invasive or that intensive. Ours have been really simple, and I feel like the benefits are worth the cost to us. And then Ira, he just likes getting the gift cards. I think he likes knowing that he's helping other kids, but he's very motivated by the toys and the gift cards and the money they give him. And so that always makes it a pretty easy decision for him. If it's just giving an extra vial or two of blood or playing a game on the iPad. So you can see he's got stickers. He's got, sometimes he'll sell me his gift card to Target and he'll take the money and go to the record store and pick out a new album, which is what he's doing in the bottom right. And then I think he and his little brother are holding the tokens they got from the machine after he gave blood at another appointment. And then, yeah, that's him putting the token in the machine. So that's some of our motivation. And then the next slide. Any hesitations? I would say the things that would cause me to think twice about it were if I thought that the study I was participating in was really invasive, and if Ira was stressed out about it. And I feel like he already goes through a lot of medical procedures that are kind of tough on him. And so if it was causing him a lot of duress, that would make me really think hard about it. And like I said, we did drop the stool sample because we were finding it was very difficult to get a stool sample from a 4-year-old at home and then ship it under the right conditions so that it got there in time. And it just became too much work and it was too stressful. So we dropped that and we continued participating in the rest of the components of that study. So that was an example of something we just decided wasn't worth it for us. But I think the time, the energy that it takes, we've never had to have any kind of financial expenses, but that would be something that would probably make me think twice about it as well. So go ahead and flip to the next one. So my advice for families that are interested in participating or exploring participating in a clinical research study would be to ask a lot of questions. There's no such thing as a stupid question. I ask a lot of questions. If you are wondering something, there's a really good chance somebody else is probably wondering that same thing as well. And everybody that I've asked has always been really happy to answer my questions. And if they can't find the answer, usually they know somebody who can, or they're able to look into it and get back to me with an answer. Another piece of advice, I think something that's tricky for a lot of the newborn screen families is that you can't ask your infant if they want to give extra blood for research. They're not really capable of, sharing their feelings on that or even understanding. If your child, like mine, is a little bit older, I think it's great to talk to them about it, tell them what the study is, find out if they have any questions about it, help them understand why they might want to participate, and then really listen to their concerns if they do have things that make them nervous about it. And then let them be part of the decision-making, whether they want to participate or not. I also would advise families to really take advantage of resources at your hospital or your clinic, and also your child life specialists. We have had phenomenal experiences with the child life specialists at our hospital. They have really helped Ira to get through some tough things. He's also, in addition to having adrenoleukodystrophy, he had brain surgery for a different condition when he was 5 and spent a week in the hospital, had stitches that he had to go back and have removed. And they're phenomenal. Like literally their entire job is to help kids through these really tough times. And so if you are taking part in a study and it's something that is stressful to your child, like giving blood, they are there to help you. That's what they are there for, and they want to help you and they love it. And so don't be afraid to ask for them and see if there's anything they can do to help. And then I would just say, make it fun. Like with Ira, and I know my sister who has my nephew Nico, who's also got ALD, we like to kind of have traditions where after a long day at the hospital, I know they go to the pancake house and get, chocolate chip pancakes is their thing. Ira always wants to go to the record store and pick out a new album. We always look for like the food trucks, like the taco trucks outside, or we go to the coffee shop. But just kind of establishing those little positive traditions with your kids so that when they already are having a lot of time at the hospital or the clinic, and then you're adding to that or kind of, piling on with additional research that's voluntary, kind of find a way to make it fun for them so that they remember the positives about it and not the negatives. And I mean, honestly, like Ira thinks getting the day off of school to go to the hospital is kind of special and kind of fun because we go to the playground, we go to the Kyle Rudolph end zone where he can play basketball. And we try to really make it fun to take away from the tough parts. Don't be afraid to change your mind. If you agree to participate and then it ends up being really taxing on you, it's always okay to change your mind. And don't feel bad about it. Like, don't guilt trip yourself about it because we all have enough guilt the way it is. So if you do find that something is not a good fit for your family, I would say it's okay to say no, and you don't need to beat yourself up over it because we only have so much energy and resources for our family. And so if it's not a good fit, it's not a good fit, and that's okay. So I think that's probably about it for me. I think I had just like one last, yeah. All right. And thank you to Camille for putting this guide together. I think it's such a great resource and people are going to find it really useful.
I wanted to add that Matthew goes to Minnesota every year as well for his monitoring and
oh, nice. Yeah.
Biological testing and
Yep.
and the MRI and all that.
Those pictures look familiar.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And in the Lorenzo Zola study, the moms and the parents, I should say, we did find each other eventually and supported one another, and that was helpful. But yeah, getting through all that and sharing recipes or whatever. So
sure.
Thanks, Jennifer. That's interesting because we have 3 sons and 1 daughter, and our daughter's adopted, but we had to get our 2 sons tested as well, and they came back negative. So yeah, Matthew is our only one, and I've tested negative. I don't even carry it, so this is all like,
oh wow,
yeah,
okay,
really strange. So
yeah.
Thank you all so much for sharing. I think this will be a wonderful resource for families. If anyone watching has questions, you could put them into the Q&A. Camille, you did get a shout out from watching. I don't know if you saw.
Hi, Christy.
But we do have a couple of questions that we received ahead of time, which we can ask for the next couple of minutes. One that we got, which I think is really interesting, is what is the appropriate way to discuss participation with kids as they age? So thinking about speaking to your sons about engaging in the trials as they age.
Do you want me to take it?
Well, I just remember having this question with Kate Girl and Kathleen, how to talk to your kids about that. But we kind of just talked about the very long chain fatty acid thing. You know, he couldn't break it down in his body, and just really simplified that this might help with keeping his body healthy with the diet and the oil. And he just really seemed okay with that. He knew it wasn't going to be forever. And
it's fair. I mean, the question is really age. There's a lot that age has to come into it of the child, and then also just their personality. There's a lot of variance there. So I think that there's probably no one right way to do it, but making it fun, or not fun, but at least
well, yeah,
light.
I mean, you can make the food fun and the recipe. I mean, I made so many things that matched the parties he was going to and all that. But I think personality does have something to do with it too. He just was easygoing about it. If it had been really highly stressful, I'm sure we would have thought differently about it. So go ahead, Jennifer.
Yeah, so I would agree with that. And then I would also add to that, I kind of let Ira direct it. So it's trying to strike that balance between telling them what they need to know and what they want to know, but not giving them more information than they need and overwhelming them. I try to keep some of that worry for myself and not pass that on to him. So he is a very inquisitive child. He does ask a lot of questions, and I try to answer them factually. Like, I don't sugarcoat things. I tell him, but it has changed a lot from the time he was diagnosed when he was 4. I remember describing it to him as he had a naughty gene inside his body that wasn't doing its job. It wasn't doing what it was supposed to do, and it was causing problems. And that's why he needed to go to these appointments, because he kept asking, why do I have to do this? Mm-hmm. And he had brothers who didn't have to do it. So it was a fair question. So kind of that kid-friendly language. And then as he's gotten older, I've been able to explain a little bit more, but he hasn't asked a ton of questions. And so I haven't like gone out of my way to give him information that he doesn't necessarily need.
Yeah.
So, and like I said, as far as the studies we've participated in, he's asymptomatic. And so he has not had to go through like a transplant or some of these other really difficult things. So for him, it's just getting the MRI, getting the, giving the blood draws. And so the studies we've done have been not really like hard or involved a lot of having to explain things to him. I think it would be different if he was participating in a study that involved, a lot more from him. And so I'd have to give that some thought. I don't know if that's helpful. Yeah.
I think that's very helpful. Anything to add, Camille?
I don't think there's much I can add to both of those responses. I learned a lot just from listening to both of you and how you've kind of addressed that with your families. I think from the point of view of the research team, we make an effort to, in the consent process, really tailor that experience to the age and the developmental kind of stage of the child. So for, like a child under 6, we often, it's commonly accepted that like a child that young can't truly understand, what it is that they're signing up to. But once they turn 6, a lot of children have the ability to understand on a basic level, something that they're being asked to do and, why they're being asked to do it. For those children, a lot of hospitals will even have like a special form that's in very, very child-friendly language where they get to, print their name on the dotted line to show that they're giving permission for something. But yeah, I agree. I think it's going to be child dependent and then really dependent on the age of the child and kind of what they're in a place ready to understand.
Thank you. Makes sense. I'll just end with 2 quick questions. Is there a type of study or procedure that you would not consent to? Or has there ever been a time that you have declined to be part of a study and why?
For us, we have not. We've only been part of the one study, and that we looked at it as more therapeutic than study focused. But I think that Matthew is also asymptomatic, other than he has adrenal insufficiency. But I think that for us, I think that the cutoff would have to do with the level of intrusiveness that the whatever was being studied imposed. That would probably be the biggest factor for not doing it since he's asymptomatic currently. If it's going to cause a lot of pain or a lot of heartache, then we'd have to think about that long and hard before we would agree to it.
I would agree with that. I would also add, as a mother of 4 children, if it involved a lot of travel, I think that would be really tough for us because our kids are at an age where they're all in school. It's hard to miss school. It's hard to miss work. So I think if a study involved us having to travel a lot, I'm not sure, even if I wanted to participate, that logistically I could make that happen. And then I agree if it seemed overly intrusive, And I felt like it was, and if Ira was like, I don't want to do this, I would probably respect his decision and decline.
Thank you. And real last question, maybe for Camille or for anyone. What is the best way to find out about available trials? Do you think that trials.gov is the best way, through your doctor? What's the best way?
I was thinking it would be through Matt's doctor up in Minnesota, Dr. Lund, but we haven't heard too many for his age. It seems to be more for the younger ones, that because we haven't really had any offers for him to participate in very many since Lorenzo's oil. So
yeah, I think 3 of the 4 studies that we participated in that I talked about earlier were all studies that Dr. Gupta told us about, either at an appointment or the brain study. He called and said, I think Ira would be a really great candidate for this. Here's what it involves. Here's where you can get more information. Are you interested? And so I do think coming from a doctor that we know and love and trust makes us more likely to want to participate in it. And that is the only way that we, I think, have come to the studies that we've done.
Yeah, I said that Matt was only involved in one. That's not true. He's also involved in that same national registry study that Dr. Gupta is running.
I think from my perspective, I think of 3 main avenues as sort of the most useful ones to learn about new studies. One would be through, your child's primary doctor. Recognizing that if you go to kind of one of the big like ALD research centers, you might be more likely to hear about studies through that avenue. Versus if you see a neurologist who isn't doing as much research themselves, you might not get, the same set of opportunities through them. The next one would be clinicaltrials.gov, which is going to cover all clinical trials in the United States. So and you can just go to clinicaltrials.gov, search adrenoleukodystrophy, and get a list of studies that pop up, as well as contact information for how to learn more about the studies. The main caveats with clinicaltrials.gov are that it only covers opportunities in the United States. Sorry about that. It only covers opportunities in the United States, and it is not going to cover all of the natural history studies. So all of the, similar to some of the ones that Jennifer has participated in with her son, the ones where you're doing a survey or just giving an extra sample of blood, those aren't required to be included on clinicaltrials.gov, so you won't get all of them through there. And then the last one that I would strongly recommend is through groups like ALD Connect. I noticed just in the last couple of days across my social media feed, ALD Connect was sharing news about a new study that's enrolling patients. And so I think that's a great way, because a lot of times for rare diseases, researchers will go through patient advocacy groups like ALD Connect to sort of spread the word about their studies. So strong plug for ALD Connect.
Thank you. And thank you to all of our panelists. This webinar has been wonderful, and I think will be a great resource. Thank you to Camille for developing that amazing family guide and sharing it with us today. And thank you also to Emily, Troy, and Jennifer for sharing your family perspectives. We really appreciate it. And with that, I think we'll wrap up. So thank you again for being here. And this webinar will be available online after today. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.